Hello, everyone, and hello, Jeff. It's really nice to meet you, although from a distance. And I would like to start this conversation. I'm very interested by how you started your role and how you started to be involved in environmental humanities. You are the director of the Center for Environmental Humanities at the University of Utah. So it would really be interesting for me to hear from you how you started this job.
Sure. Thank you, Francesca. Very nice to meet you also, and a pleasure to be here. I think that the work about humanities and social change that this participates in is important and timely work. So it's exciting to be having any conversation on this subject. Particularly one that brings us around to talking about the ocean. So my own training and background is in literature and environmental literature in particular. And at the moment, I am a professor and director of the Environmental Humanities Graduate Program at the University of Utah. And the environmental humanities is a really exciting field, I think, because we try to apply the tools of the humanities to environmental solutions. Try to develop solutions from the perspective of history, of ethics, of religion, of philosophy, of aesthetics. And the kind of cultural apparatus that allows us to think about obstacles to solving problems about the human relation to the natural world or human relations to other humans that are affected by changes in the natural world. So, and which is not to draw deep distinctions between humans and nature, obviously, but that is how broader environmental problems tend to be played out in the public sphere. That is, there's the city where we live, and then there's the ocean that's getting polluted, or the trees that are getting cut down. And so I think that the environmental humanities occupies a really exciting place in the academy for its mix of rigorous scholarship and direct application to the world that we inhabit. And our students come to us with that energy. So one of the things we talk about is putting ideals into action, and to have students who care deeply about not only the ideas that inform our world, but also the particular actions they can take towards changing that world for the better. It is a really exciting thing for our field. And so that's one of the reasons that I have landed in the environmental humanities. And finally, maybe it's worth saying that, we were all doing a lot of this work before there was a term called environmental humanities, right? And so there's a way in which the terminology has caught up with the actuality. In other words, lots of us recognized ourselves in this descriptor, environmental humanities, and had this kind of lovely feeling of like, oh, this is the party I've been wanting to go to all these years, and now here it is, and it's called environmental humanities. Could you tell me a little bit about your work and how it relates to these questions of the environmental humanities?
Yeah, sure. I have a background in sciences, in natural sciences. Actually, I studied at the Ca' Foscari University, so I'm very happy to participate in this discussion. Also for this reason, and I enrolled in this course, which was at the time was something new, like environmental humanities. For Italy. So it was kind of like the first course on environmental sciences in Italy. So we were like the pioneers of environmental sciences in Italy, and that was kind of exciting because we were 70 people from all around Italy coming to Venice, which is, of course, an amazing place to study environmental sciences.
Yeah.
And we had, different ideas and, reasons why we wanted to enroll in the program. But we actually shaped the program together with our professors. So it was really an exciting time in which we were thinking, what are the courses that we should follow? What are the, different approaches? And we were very much, trying to have this interdisciplinary approach. So, of course, we had a very strong natural sciences basis, but then we had courses on environmental politics, environmental economics, also communication, science communication. So that was kind of like what drove me that to always in the following steps of my career, I always had this idea of having this interdisciplinary approach, like holistic approach to the environmental problems, which kind of linked to what you were saying. And but my big passion is the ocean. So I was born and raised in the south of Italy, so very strong linked with the ocean, with the sea, as we say in Italy. And so when it was the time to decide what kind of thesis to do for to complete my master, I decided to go back to the south of Italy, and I did my thesis on a marine protected area around Naples, in the beautiful Amalfitan coast. So I had the chance to spend time in doing oceanographic cruises. Like that was the best of my time. And then since then I continue working on ocean management, ocean protection, but always having this idea of bringing different perspectives. So of course the science perspective, the marine science perspective, but also bringing the more sociological, socioeconomic aspects of that. And after a period in doing research in the academia, I started to work for UNESCO. I currently work for UNESCO, for the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. And I'm now in charge of a program which is called Ocean Literacy. So it's about understanding this relationship between humans and ocean. So that's why is very much linked to what you were saying. It's really about building a civic relationship between human beings and the ocean.
Well, don't you think that, well, I mean, I will ask you, do you think that marine protected areas are a promising way to do that, both ecologically and culturally, or are you finding that there are barriers between developing a kind of a broader appreciation for the work that marine protected areas can do?
I think is a very interesting area of work, and as I told you, my thesis was exactly on a marine protected area, and there are a number of studies showing that they work. Marine protected areas, they work, and they actually sometimes they worked. I mean, the results can be seen quite quickly, after the protection is in place. But of course, the problem is, but this is a problem that relates to all protected areas, even on land. When you say to a community that you impose certain rules, there is always a resistance from people, because they always, I mean, normally people link this idea of protection with stopping any economic activity. But the successful stories are there. There are successful stories in which these marine protected areas were developed together with the community, and even sometimes was the community to ask to the government to create a marine protected area. And those, of course, are the ones that are more successful, because they can be a sort of like emblematic example of how we can manage ocean resources in a sustainable way, still having economic activities, having a community around, developing around an ecosystem, and have everything going in the right direction. So there are a number of successful stories. So, and in particular, I think is really key to say that in the ocean there are no boundaries, and so it's really important to think that we should develop network of marine protected areas, so that we can further promote conservation of certain species and certain habitats.
It's tricky. It's interesting to think about ways, with your really important work with UNESCO, to think about ways to like communicate the effectiveness of marine protected areas without seeming to be, without seeming to impose an external force upon a historically used resource for given communities. We see that where I am right now in New England in the United States, where the Obama administration declared a marine protected area about maybe 120 miles from here, actually, south and east of here where I sit. And it's called the Northeast Seamounts and Canyons Marine Protected Area. And President Trump recently came to the state of Maine, and one of the things he did was to say, I'm canceling that marine protected area. And it wasn't canceled on the basis of some kind of scientific change. It was canceled as a kind of symbolic toss towards a distrust of external government-imposed environmental solutions. And this is a way that we have, as environmentalists, for decades kind of lost the battle around convincing working communities, right? The old Richard White essay, "Are you an environmentalist or do you work for a living?" We've kind of lost the battle in convincing communities that, hey, there are some benefits to this kind of conservation strategy. And in the case of marine protected areas, as I understand the science, many times they actually increase the catch for fishermen who are working in that zone, right? Because you get a richer, sort of broader biodiversity in the area, and fish swim in and then swim out to be caught.
Yes.
But that's not somehow that hasn't been captured more broadly, which is just a way of saying that the kind of work that the environmental humanities can do and needs to do is some of this kind of story making, narrative presentation. So not just being a kind of explainer of science, but also a kind of like making it live for people in a way that is perhaps compelling and can be, an agent of change. So that we don't become just another political football to be kicked back and forth according to the kind of simplifications of political tensions between a couple of parties.
Yeah, no, it's really this is the point, actually. And in my field visit around the world, I've seen, and I talk to many people, and this is always the topic. Again, as I was saying before, environmental protection is seen as in contradiction with economic development, which is not actually the case. On the contrary, but there were situations in which I saw that the area, the marine protected area, has been built, as I said, together with the community, and already offering an alternative. Already, for example, thinking about how we can change the jobs of people were, for example, fishermen before, and they can become, scuba diving instructors, for example. So if you already propose an alternative which can be developed in harmony with the idea of preserving the marine environment, I think that's the key for success. And one thing that was really interesting for me in all these years that I've been studying the relationship between humans and the ocean is that the ocean, the marine environment, is generally speaking a source of inspiration for people.
Yeah.
And so when you talk to communities about why they are attached to their coastal areas, why they are attached to their specific marine environment, then you have a strong point on why we should preserve that area. And I was, for example, talking to a scientist, and I was telling her, when you go to schools and you teach to young kids about the marine environment, you can also use like novels, you can use poems, you can use songs. There are a lot of songs and poems and novels about the ocean, about the marine environment. And then she told me, well, actually, now that you tell me, like, the book that I remember the most from my childhood is a book about the sea, and probably that's why I decided to become a marine scientist.
Yeah, I do. I'm with you. Obviously, you're preaching to the choir on the sort of cultural forces. I wonder about changes that communities are seeing on the basis of a warming climate, rising sea levels, acidifying ocean settings. Like, how does that affect your work?
Well, I think there's been a big change in the last years. I mean, I've observed a big change in the perception of people, because now those changes are evident.
Hmm.
While maybe only a few years ago it was more like a scenario, in 100 years this will happen. Just let's think about what happened in Venice last November.
Yeah.
The huge flood that we had. This was really kind of like, and not only for the city of Venice, because when you talk about Venice, everybody's interested all around the world. And I think this was kind of like a wake-up call for people to say, this is not a scenario, this is not something that will happen in 100 years, this is happening.
Yeah.
And is happening now, and is affecting, again, going back to the attachment of people to, for example, cultural heritage. This is also affecting our cultural heritage, and in that I definitely saw a change in the perception of people, also in the way in which businesses are approaching the environmental issues. I definitely saw a big change in the last 3-4 years in the way in which entrepreneurs are thinking about the environment, probably because they know that their customers are more aware about the importance of environmental protection.
Yeah, right. And they have business decisions. I mean, you can see this in the United States, where the government will deny the reality of climate change, but the military has all kinds of scenario planning and is actively moving naval bases because of climate change, right? So, there's one group who can kind of spin it as they like, and then there's another group for whom these physical realities are, experiences on the ground. And the Acqua Alta in Venice is a kind of powerful example of that for people who are trying to make a living there. But Venice is I think a wonderful example because in some ways, like my relation to Venice is a very as somebody who's only been there for a few days in my life, mine is a very common and powerful, like the pressing relation to Venice is of the imagination.
Mhm.
It is obviously it's a real city, and there are real people who live there and are making lives there, but it exists as this kind of important city of the mind for Western culture, and as a kind of bridge to the East as well. And the importance of Venice as a city of broad cultural imagination that's being afflicted, that is looking kind of like a new Atlantis, um, is is potentially something that's motivating for broad groups of people. I think Venice occupies this really crucial relation to the ocean in a way that for particularly Western people, the story of a storm hitting the Philippines, or a typhoon affecting some area of Amitav Ghosh's Bengal. Those are stories of interest, but they kind of fade from one's mind because we don't have that same like sediment of understanding of the place that I think we do for Venice. And so I'm hopeful that Venice is a kind of motivating laboratory for us all about the changing climate. In a way, not exactly Venice, but my work, my professional work, has followed a trajectory from green to blue. So as an environmentalist, my first book was about mountains. As an environmentalist, I really did, an environmental literature scholar. I was invested, as it turns out, in terrestrial landscapes. Like that's where the discussions were around preservation and around pollution and around policies that affect indigenous people and etc. And so, as we came in the last decade into more and more overt discussion of a changing climate and a warming planet, these stories kept bringing me back to the ocean. If you want to think about climate, you really have to think about the ocean. And I actually grew up on the ocean, or on a coast, in a very small town in the state of Maine in the United States, and the ocean has always figured as a kind of backdrop for me. I was intimately connected with it, but it wasn't until I really started attending to climate change that I realized, I kind of need to get on board with these studies about coastal communities and about the ocean itself. And so, the blue humanities is this increasing attention to the cultural power, the cultural significance of the ocean around us. And so I think that my own somewhat slow and belated journey beyond green to blue is in a way indicative of what environmentalism can be doing by waking up to the significance of the ocean as the place that it's where the big storms come from. It's where the currents that affect our temperatures where we live, the kind of climate zones within which we live, the impact on our food web, and not to mention the fact that some huge percentage, is it 80% of people on the planet live within 60 miles of the ocean?
Yes.
Not exactly those numbers, it's close
Yes.
enough.
Yes.
And so I think that the ocean returns to center stage, just like it's at the very beginning of the Old Testament. Like we're coming back to paying attention to the deep here,
Yes.
because it is from the deep that we're getting our really distinct climate impacts. And so I think the work that we're doing, you and I are doing here, talking about different perspectives on the ocean, is really exciting to me, and timely. Like we need to be working in these directions. So I'll give you a chance to respond or share a story of your own on that tag.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, I've noticed a big difference, and for me, the big change in the perception of people towards the ocean started when this big issue of plastic pollution came into the scene, because plastic is something that it's part of our lives, and so people could really relate to that, and also could think, I could easily do something to change that situation of pollution, because if I don't use my plastic bottle, or if I use a fabric bag, and instead of a plastic bag, I can do something. Instead of maybe going back to the climate change topic, where people were thinking, this is a too big issue, I cannot do anything, because this is more related to industries and production, so I cannot do that much on the climate change crisis, while I can do something, or I can just go to the beach and do a beach cleanup. And all these beach cleanups were a way for people to really get involved and feel that they were doing something good for the marine environment. And this, in parallel, has created a lot of changes in the way the ocean are governed, the attention of the media on the ocean, the attention also of the United Nations on the ocean. The very first UN Ocean Conference was held only in 2017.
Yeah.
In 70 years of history of the United Nations, there had never been a conference only on the ocean. And in 2017, we had the first one. And since then, there was this appointment of the first ever UN Special Envoy for the Ocean. The idea also of protecting the biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. We were talking about this for years and years and years, and now finally, these things are being discussed at the UN, and in the new binding instrument is being developed to finally protect those areas where we actually, there is the highest concentration of biodiversity of the entire planet. And so, definitely the attention of the entire society at different levels towards the ocean has changed a lot in the last years. And my role of working on ocean literacy, that is much more than just informing people of the things that you mentioned, why the ocean is so important, is really and going back to what you were saying at the beginning about action. This is something I really very dear to my heart. When I say what is ocean literacy, I say is about transforming knowledge into action.
Mm-hmm.
And giving to people, being that a citizen, a business person, a policymaker, a decision maker, giving the tools and the skills to use this knowledge to then take action. That's the idea of ocean literacy is not only about telling you how many species are in the ocean, or what are the currents, or when I go to schools, I always say that I don't care that much that you learn about how many species are in the ocean, also because there are so many species that we still don't know about. But it's that I give you the idea that you can do something. you can do something towards the idea of finding solutions to the big problems that the ocean is facing.
That's tough, isn't it? Because the ocean is so. One of the challenges is the kind of Grotius's mare liberum, the fact that the sea is this grand circulating body beyond national boundaries. Obviously, it's very complicated, having to do with 200-mile limits and other things. So our solutions are necessarily intricate, small-scale weavings of efforts, and yet, what you described from the UN's perspective has to do with kind of connecting the links of these different chains towards a broader, not just appreciation, but action in relation to this body that we share. I mean, Kimberly Patton's book, "The Sea Washes Away All Evils," speaks to very directly, even in the title, to this long sense of the ocean as a space for diluting our sins, right? And so that can be part of a religious rite. It can also be the waste from some plastic plant somewhere. And so, a perception of the ocean as limitlessly able to absorb our pollution is deeply problematic.
Absolutely.
And it's great that, to the extent that the UN and other bodies can help groups who are separated by state lines to cooperate towards some kind of care for species and places that transcend state lines, in short.
Yeah, no, that's I now we just launched a campaign for the World Oceans Day, which was a few days ago, and this campaign is called "Drop the S in Oceans," because we want everybody to say ocean instead of oceans. This is not just a letter; is because we want everybody to be aware that this is just a big body of water that is, as Jacques Cousteau was saying, is the great unifier on this planet, and this is so important in the era we live. And this pandemic showed so clearly that we are all interconnected. That there's nothing that you can deal just in your own country or in your own region or community, and the ocean by definition is characterized by this idea of connectivity. And so for me is also a very nice metaphor when we talk about environmental issues. It's complex. It shows that connectivity is key, that everything is linked, that we cannot just deal with one specific issue or topic, or coming from just this discipline background. This is also something, I mean, the marine science is by definition interdisciplinary. You have physics, you have biology, you have geology. So oceanography is by definition interdisciplinary. So that's why I think is, apart from the fact that, the ocean is key on this planet, can teach us so many things. Studying the ocean can teach us many things about other environmental issues that we have to deal with.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that this is also a place where the arts can contribute. So if you think about climate change, and you think about what Glenn Albrecht calls the new abnormal, right? The new abnormal is what we live in this moment of uncertainty and growing chaos, really, around bigger storms and rising seas. Well, there are artists who have tried to contend not just with the climate change component, but with the more direct human contributions of, as you say, as you mentioned, plastic pollution, might be overfishing, might be the impacts of acidification. So there are a couple of artists who have reproduced Hokusai's The Great Wave, and this recognizable cultural artifact, nearly 200 years old, but it is about as recognizable as the Mona Lisa, and people have recreated the Great Wave in bits of plastic that they found on beaches, or in other forms that kind of combine a love or attention to the ocean as a source of beauty and cultural significance, and a reminder that, hey, here's this threat to ocean health in the form of this plastic. There's a sculptor named Jason DeCaires Taylor, whose work you may know, and his work is in the Caribbean. The work I'm thinking about, a sculpture that he has called Vicissitudes, and it's 30 feet down under the sea, and it's created to have it is a circle of human figures, life-size human figures holding hands, and they're facing outwards, and they are being affected by the growth of coral, being affected by acidification, and being affected by the growth of marine plants, and all this in a context that speaks to the threats that face the Caribbean Sea, and the threats that face the people who live there, and their history of slavery and oppression, and the Middle Passage. When you have people underwater, in the Caribbean, it kind of conjures images of the slave trade, and the Middle Passage. And in this piece of art, Taylor points us to the significance of the ocean as a living body that is important to us, at the same time as he says, like, hey, let's look at this intricate cultural past that is experienced quite differently for the tourist who shows up and has drinks delivered to the beach, versus the person who is living in this environment and has faced 400 years of racism and oppression. And the sea holds all these things. Derek Walcott's long poem, Omeros, does some of that same work. So I'm not going to list lots and lots of texts here, but what I'm getting at is the kind of cultural significance of the ocean as it plays out within artifacts, and how those can reach people, in addition to, supplementary to the important work being done by scientists and biologists and sociologists. Sometimes a view of Hokusai's The Great Wave, speaks 1,000 words, and brings attention to the very issues that we're pushing for.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the beauty of working on ocean literacy is that I can create connection and with art and with literature and with with music, with we just got like a sort of gift by a Turkish musician who just donated to us a music done especially for the World Oceans Day. This is really what moves people. We know that emotions are moving people, being them the president of a state, or a citizen. The emotions are moving us. And also, when I talk to people that in a way or another are linked to the ocean, there is always a stories about when they were kids, and they were, as you were saying, that you were raised on a coastal area, and for me the same. So this is so much part of what drives us then to take action, and is again, what Jacques Cousteau was saying about, that we care about what we love, and we love about what we understand. Why is something so relevant for us? Sometimes you need to say to people certain, I like to call like the ABC of ocean knowledge. So what everybody should know about the ocean, like, the connection with the climate system, the fact that more than 50% of the oxygen we breathe comes from the ocean. And this is thing that people don't know. When I say this, this comes as a surprise to people, because also in books in schools, we learn that the trees are producing the oxygen we breathe. So
Yeah.
yes, so when I say, it's also the ocean, because in the ocean there are little plants, let's say, so let's call them little plants that produce a lot of oxygen. So this comes as a surprise, but then when it happens to me that I meet these people again after some months, or they always say, I always remember that you told me that, the oxygen I breathe comes from the ocean. So creating this link, this connection, and it's key for me in driving people to really take action. Again, whatever role these people have, I think is important to show that everybody has a role to play. An artist, as you're saying, academics, entrepreneurs, and of course policymakers and decision makers.
Yeah, I do think it's that mix isn't quite the word, but collaboration perhaps, of perspectives. The power of some kind of interdisciplinarity is I think here, and I was thinking about favorite books or influential texts, so I thought I would ask you. What is an influential or favorite text you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I actually wanted to mention so many books, because
Yeah.
there are so many authors that are key, and I actually wanted to bring one book of Rachel Carson, who she is so important for the environmental movement, generally speaking. But maybe she's known for Silent Spring, but few people know that she was also she started as a marine biologist, and she wrote these 3 books, this trilogy about the ocean, and one is called The Sea Around Us, and it's so nice because she speaks about the wonder, the sense of wonder that we have when we are in nature, and again, going back to that emotional component of remembering when we were kids, because these books are about her taking her nephew on the coast, and telling him about creatures, about marine biology, etc., etc. And she was always saying, if we try to tell to people, or let the people remember about this sense of wonder, probably they will have a less taste for distraction.
Yeah.
And I think this is what we've tried to discuss in during this talk, that when we let the people reconnect to that sense of also of pleasure that we have when we are in front of like the ocean. Also, there are a lot of studies showing that it's something that we know, that it's nice to be on the beach and looking at the ocean, but now there are scientific studies showing that is actually true, that that the water, it's very important for our psychological well-being, and even like the heartbeat, the pressure, the stress level. So there are a lot of studies showing that being close to the ocean is very important for our health. So I think the work of Rachel Carson is really. I mean, it would be nice to to let everybody know about her work on the ocean, because I think is really nice, and it's very much linked also to her capacity to write in such a poetic way and describing what she was saying in such a poetic way. So this is something I would like to suggest to who is watching us to look at these and read again this trilogy by Rachel Carson.
That's great. Yeah, The Sea Around Us, in particular, jumps out at me as an example of an interdisciplinary text, right? I mean, she has she uses poetic language to make points that are founded in kind of clear scientific thinking about the oceans. And she's somebody whose success as a popular scientist is wrapped up in her ability to write in a poetic, in a beautiful fashion. She was so talented. And so, she embodies a kind of interdisciplinarity the rest of us can only wish for. The book I thought I would mention is a kind of contemporary bookend to that, and I'm thinking about Callum Roberts' book, The Unnatural History of the Sea. Mm-hmm. And his he's Callum Roberts is a marine biologist in Britain. But The Unnatural History of the Sea is written in a very approachable kind of audience-aware fashion. It is not a scientific paper. It reads in a very approachable way and tells the story, in short, of what he calls shifting baselines. And that's a term people will be familiar with. But he's talking about the importance of these baselines to fisheries management now, in order to understand how to manage catches off of our coasts. We need an accurate picture. We need an accurate understanding of how many fish used to live there. And so he does a kind of deep dive into the historical records of fishing in the Atlantic, and has these beautiful images of the exploration and early fishing off of Britain, and then Iceland, and then Greenland, and then what is now the Maritimes in Canada, and now North America. So he renders these, sort of like Rachel Carson, he renders these images of abundance and then talks in clear detail about the challenges of trying to fish now, and to try to understand where the fish stocks actually stand, so that we can come up with policies that are sustainable both for the fishers and for the inhabitants of the global ocean who live and breathe underneath that water. So yeah, I think that Callum Roberts' Unnatural History of the Sea is well worth the read.
Thank you. I will do that. I think it was really nice to have this conversation with you, and I hope that next time you will come to Venice, we will have the chance to meet in person and to continue this discussion, because I think is really key to give the chance to people to understand the complexity of the challenges that we have ahead, but again, also giving to people the idea, as I was saying, that they can do something, that we can still do something, and each one from its own perspective, and bringing the different perspectives on board, which, as we mentioned, is the key to find the right solutions.
Well, thank you, Francesca. I appreciate that, and look forward to seeing you in Venice sometime. And thanks for your really important work with UNESCO. I think that a view from Venice. Venice is such a great sort of lens for looking at these issues. And it makes me think of Wordsworth's poem about Wordsworth has a poem called on the extinction of the Venetian Republic, but he talks in that poem about that beautiful ceremony, the marriage of the sea ceremony, and that image of city leaders going out into, I guess, the Adriatic to drop a ring into the sea to kind of indicate respect, indicate a kind of betrothal between the place and its ocean context, is a really nice cultural marker of the sort of attention that we should all be paying to the ocean around us. And it's a good reminder to me. I mean, I'm not preaching to people about this. I'm learning about it also. And I think that Venice is a wonderful place to be, a place that can teach us all a lot about our interwoven and quite tender relation to between culture and ocean.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you. All best.
To you too.